The Mass Effect Legendary Edition is only a few weeks away, and one of the biggest decisions that you will make when starting the series is what class to play, as this will affect your overall experience with the game. This video series is designed to give you an in-depth look into each class so that you can make the most informed choice to match your preferred playstyle. In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive look at the Engineer class and everything it has to offer, as well as looking at how the class evolved across the trilogy and some tips and advice on some of the best companions that pair nicely with this class. Engineers are tech specialists. Using their holographic Omni tool, they can decrypt security systems and disrupt enemy weapons or shields. Essentially, the Engineer is the ultimate support class. They usually hang back and blast through enemy defenses, disrupting and disabling opponents while staying out of direct combat and supporting their squad mates from behind. Think of them as the tech equivalent of the Biotic Adept. Some of the Engineer's strengths include access to all tech talents, giving them plenty of options for debuffing enemies and removing tactical and defensive options. This gives the party a huge advantage in combat. Engineers are strongest when fighting against synthetic enemies, as most of their abilities are effective, doing increased damage. However, they also function well against all enemy types due to the versatility of their talents, allowing them to overload and shut down weapons, enemy tech and biotic abilities, and deal extra damage to organics with moves like Neural Shock. The Engineer does have some major weaknesses though. In Mass Effect 1, they can only train in pistols, which is best at mid-range, meaning that they struggle with long or close-range combat. In terms of survivability, their reliance on shields and ability to equip only light armor makes the Engineer extremely vulnerable. They are also somewhat weaker in combat, and the amount of damage that they can deal and receive is considerably lower than the other classes. In the original Mass Effect, combat for the Engineer revolves around keeping your distance and repeatedly firing off tech talents to debuff and stagger the enemy. As such, they receive the lowest weapons training and are only able to train and become proficient in pistols, eventually gaining access to the Marksman talent, which improves fire rate and accuracy, as well as reducing overheating. While your priority should be on leveling up your tech talents as quickly as possible, it is worth spending some points in your pistol talent tree, as this is essential to the class, especially after using a tech talent to weaken an enemy. It's always a good idea to follow this up with a barrage of fire from your pistol while waiting for your next ability to recharge. Given the squishy nature of the Engineer with its reduced health and armor, there are two passive talent trees designed to make you more survivable. Those are Basic Armor and Medicine. Basic Armor is a good talent to invest in, as every point spent into this tree increases damage resistance and hardening, which provides increased resistance to physical and biotic attacks. This tree, when leveled, will also unlock the Shield Boost skill, which when used increases the recharge rate of your shields. The passive talent Medicine, when leveled, reduces the cooldown of Medigel and allows you to use Neural Shock, which is extremely effective against organic enemies, paralyzing them for a brief amount of time and doing toxic damage. Next, let's look at the active powers available to the Engineer. First up, you have Decryption. This is extremely useful as it allows the player to gain access to higher level terminals and unlock caches with more valuable mods, weapons and armor. It also increases the damage done by the explosions of tech talents. Spending points into this tree also unlocks the Sabotage skill, which deactivates an opponent's weapon, preventing them from firing back and giving the Engineer a definite advantage in combat. Hacking allows the Engineer to turn synthetic enemies against each other, which can turn the tide of battle, especially when facing off against the Geth. Its most useful passive buff though is that it reduces the recharge times on all tech talents. This is essential to the Engineer class, which relies so heavily on the frequent and rapid use of their powers. The Electronics tree increases shield strength, given that the Engineer relies so heavily on their shield due to their reduced health when compared to other classes. It's a good idea to level this tree up as soon as possible. Spending points into this tree also unlocks the Overload skill, which when used disables enemy shields, allowing you to directly attack an enemy's health. The Damping talent increases the radius of tech explosions and allows you to disable enemy tech and biotics. This is extremely useful against higher level enemies like Krogan Battlemasters and Geth Destroyers. Finally, as you level up, players can choose to spend points into their Engineer class talent. Putting points into this increases the Engineer's tech protection and decreases the recharge time of all tech powers. As you progress through the game, the Engineer can also eventually specialize into one of two specializations. Operative, which allows the Engineer to specialize in Sabotage and Overload and provides a further bonus to tech power recharge times, or alternatively Medic, which specializes in recharging Medigel, increasing its effectiveness as well as the effectiveness of the Neural Shock ability overall, so generally making the Engineer more survivable and more able to heal squad mates when needed to keep them in the fight, distracting the enemy and dealing damage. Overall, the Engineer is an incredibly versatile class, offering plenty of tactical options if you know how to use your abilities well. At the start of a fight, it's always a good idea to use tech talents like Sabotage to stop enemies firing back on you, or Overload to take down enemy shields so you can thin their ranks. Try to target large groups to affect as many enemies as you can. And if you have the opportunity, prioritize and debuff larger targets to take them out of the fight as soon as possible, especially the more aggressive enemies like Husks and Krogan that tend to rush your position, a situation you want to avoid given the squishy and lower damage dealing nature of the class. When it comes to choosing the right squad mates in Mass Effect 1, as the Engineer is primarily a support class, you want to choose team members that are strong fighters. Ideal choices would be Ashley, Rex, or Garrus. They can deal a large amount of damage, and Rex's biotic abilities can be especially useful, with Stasis and Throw providing options for crowd control, and Warp an extremely useful debuffing move against enemies' health, armor, and barrier. Rex also has a natural health regeneration from his Krogan Battlemaster tree, making him near impossible to kill. Both Rex and Ashley also have a high amount of health, which means they can take the aggro off you, acting as a first line of defense as you support from the back. Garrus also has many uses due to his ability to both deal damage and debuff enemies, and Liara can also be extremely useful due to her strong biotic abilities, particularly Singularity, which is great for getting enemies close together for a Sabotage or Overload attack. Whatever combination you choose, focusing on squad mates that can deal damage and help with crowd control to keep enemies off you are key to the Engineer's survival. In Mass Effect 2, the combat is much more streamlined, with an increased focus on simple skill trees and quickly selectable class powers. The franchise took a very definite move away from the more RPG-based skill progression of the first game to a more action-orientated cover system and fluid combat, which is very much geared around weapons, class powers, and synergies. In Mass Effect 2, the main difference for the Engineer is that they now have access to more weapons, different powers, and can more easily disrupt enemies in battle. In ME2, Engineers can use submachine guns, heavy pistols, and heavy weapons, greatly improving their ability to dish out damage. Though we do know that in the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, all classes will gain access to all weapons, so this may well remove one of the Engineers' biggest weaknesses, their lack of close or long-range options. As combat in Mass Effect 2 can be intense, the Engineer is still best when behind cover, providing support with powers and weapons fire. Their powers are great at taking down shields, keeping enemies tied up, and dealing with synthetic enemies. Using powers to keep enemies at a distance is the best way to stay alive and help your squad mates deal with enemies. Using every power at your disposal is key, and the game provides a variety of new powers to give you plenty of options in combat. Overload returns and continues to act as the engineer's primary means of stripping shields and disposing of unprotected synthetics. Overload is also one of the engineer's quickest powers in that it hits its target instantly when used. However, unlike many of the class's other moves, it cannot be arced around corners and over cover, meaning that it is most effective when enemies are out in the open and should be used strategically. In Mass Effect 2, Overload is also capable of detonating explosive crates and will make most unprotected enemies with flamethrowers explode instantly, allowing you to dispose of these dangerous foes before they become a threat. One of the engineer's newest moves is Incinerate. This shoots a concentrated fire-based projectile from your Omni tool, which sets fire to its target. Incinerate is highly effective against armor and unprotected enemies and permanently stops health regeneration, which is incredibly useful against Krogan and Vulture. It also makes unprotected organic enemies panic for a few seconds, causing them to stop shooting and move out of cover, which can provide Shepard with the short window needed to retreat to safer cover if under heavy fire or the enemy gets too close. Incinerate can also be used as an instant KO against flamethrower wielding enemies in the same way that Overload can. It should be noted though that Incinerate is completely ineffective against synthetic enemies, doing significantly reduced damage. Another Omnitool based projectile attack power is the new Cryoblast. When activated, it fires a mass of supercooled particles which snap freezes targets within a certain radius. This power is most useful against unprotected enemies and completely ineffective against protected enemies with shields or armor. It's recommended therefore to use Overload or Incinerate first to weaken the target, and then once vulnerable shoot out Cryoblast, allowing you to slow their movement and freeze them in place as you and your squad mates unload with your weapons and powers to take them down. Like Incinerate, Cryoblast can be arced around cover. It's also worth noting that even a rank 1 Cryoblast is a one-hit kill on Husks, making this a useful ability as Husks will charge your position and it's easy to become overwhelmed. The engineer's signature power, and arguably its most useful one, is the new combat drone. Targeting the power on an enemy causes the drone to spawn next to that enemy and attack immediately. If a target is not selected, the drone spawns next to the player and automatically chooses and engages the nearest enemy. The drone is a great tool for forcing enemies out of cover and preventing them from hiding. It also allows you to target enemies that are further away and out of reach. Once the drone attacks an enemy, the enemy will ignore all other targets and focus exclusively on the drone until it is destroyed. Because of the short cooldown of this power, an engineer can use it to lock up almost any single enemy by keeping the drone attacking it continuously. The best use for the combat drone is usually to target the most powerful enemy on the field, keeping them busy, while you and your squad mates quickly dispatch weaker enemies before turning your sights on the bigger threat. The engineer's AI hacking power is back and remains one of the most useful moves for when facing synthetic enemies. At rank 1, it is primarily used to stop an enemy from attacking you and causes its former allies to turn on it, dealing heavy damage. In essence, providing a nice distraction and taking the aggro off you and your squad. As you level up the power, the hacked enemy becomes stronger and becomes a useful ally in its own right, dealing more significant damage. AI hacking is a move that is very situational though, and may be only suitable in missions involving Geth, so you may wish to spec into other powers first before choosing to level this one up. Finally, the engineer has access to the passive class power Tech Mastery, which when leveled offers the player the usual bonuses to their health, power cooldown, and Paragon and Renegade points. But interestingly, it also reduces the number of resources needed for research projects by up to 25%, invaluable when you're wanting to install and research upgrades to your armor, weapons, and ship. If you find the planet scanning minigame tedious, then you should maximize customize this as quickly as possible. Once you reach rank 4 in the skill tree, you can also focus into one of two specializations, Demolisher or Mechanic. For an engineer specializing in Incinerate and Overload, Demolisher is best suited as it offers a better evolution of these powers because of its passive damage boost to all tech powers. For a Cryoblast AI hacking specialist, Mechanic may be the better choice since both powers benefit more greatly from the duration bonus this specialization provides. Mass Effect 2 massively expands the roster, giving you 13 possible squad mates, though 2 of these are permanent DLC additions and 1 is a temporary squad member, only available for the duration of the DLC content. This is still a huge increase over Mass Effect 1's 5 possible companions. Squad mate abilities in Mass Effect 2, though, are more streamlined compared to ME1, where each squad mate has 8 talents. Companions in ME2 have only 2 base powers and 1 loyalty power that unlocks after completing their loyalty mission. One of these powers can also be mapped to a shortcut prompt, usually right or left on the D-pad, allowing you to activate the ability without the need to pause the action, making combat more fluid and action focused. When it comes to choosing the best squad mates in Mass Effect 2, due to the engineer's difficulty in dealing with barriers, companions with maximized warp like Miranda or Thane will be very valuable. Once Samara's loyal, her new Reeve power can serve the same purpose and is extremely powerful. Choosing a combat specialist would also be a good choice on any mission, as they can take more aggro and deal more damage, allowing the engineer to do what they do best, debuff and distract from the back. Zaid, Grunt and Garrus are good choices for their concussive shots and ammo powers. Grunt's impressive health and berserker charge, Zaid's weapon damage and Garrus's power damage bonus are all great bonuses to have in your squad too, but my personal favourite squad member in ME2 is undoubtedly Samara, as she is well suited to the engineer and fills in for many of the class's weaknesses. She is a heavy combat specialist, making her more durable than the other biotics available, but she also has several valuable debuffing and crowd control abilities with pull, throw and reeve, making her an ideal squad mate in my opinion. Mass Effect 3 takes the combat from Mass Effect 2 and uses the same powers and cover-based system, but with some tweaks. Firstly, the game introduced a new weight capacity system, which affects players' power recharge times. As engineers are most effective in a fight when using tech powers as their main form of attack and defense with weapons as backup, light weapons like pistols and SMGs are preferred, keeping their power recharge speed at or as close to 200% as possible, thus allowing them to use their abilities more frequently. In Mass Effect 3, the engineer has several returning powers, including Incinerate, Overload, Cryoblast, Combat Drone, Sabotage, and Tech Mastery. These work in much the same way as in Mass Effect 2, but each class power can now be leveled up to rank 6, and the third game in the trilogy takes a turn towards more RPG-based skill progression, as after rank 3, each subsequent rank has 2 possible branches, allowing players to customize Commander Shepard to their preferred playstyle. One of the newest powers available to the engineer in Mass Effect 3 is the Sentry Turret. This replaces the traditional grenade of other classes. It does have a fundamental difference from the Combat Drone though, in that the Sentry Turret will not move, whereas the Combat Drone seeks out targets. The other difference is that the Sentry Turret can be evolved to use a powerful short-range flamethrower, which does significant damage per second. Defensively, you can pair the turret with a sniper rifle, upgrade it with rockets for long-range covering fire, and leave it to guard a choke point or your flank, especially for when your peripheral vision is limited thanks to the sniper scope. Offensively, you can move the turret around by reusing the power so that the flamethrower is both severely harming enemies and forcing them out of cover and into clear lines of sight. The Sentry Turret and the Combat Drone are useful powers to use to distract and disrupt enemies, allowing you to take advantage with gunfire and other power combinations. Also, don't forget to name your Combat Drone and Sentry Turret for some role-playing fun, and why not post your ideas in the comments section below. The engineer does get a new passive skill tree called Fitness, which focuses on health, shields, and melee damage, and you would think this is useful given the squishy nature of the class. However, considering an engineer can do most of their damage from range, arcing their powers around corners and over cover without exposing themselves to enemy fire, you might find you don't need the survivability boost that this passive ability provides. So it may be best to focus on your core powers first before putting points into this tree. The biggest game changer for the engineer, though, was the introduction of power combos. These require two different powers to activate, a primer and a detonator. Primers determine which of the four types of power combos will be primed, and once detonated cause a massive explosion and increased damage. The four types of power combos available are Fire, Cryo, Tech, and Biotic. Biotic explosions do 2 times normal damage against barriers and armor. Enemies killed by cryo explosions shatter without leaving a corpse, and enemies caught in the blast radius but not killed or frozen can be chilled and have their movement speed slowed by 30%. Tech boosts create a blast of electricity that inflicts severe damage on the shields and health of nearby enemies and has a chance to stun them. Tech Burst also does 2 times normal damage against shields. And finally, fire explosions create a blast of flames that inflict damage against the armor and health of enemies. Fire explosions also do 2 times normal damage against armor. I won't go into too much detail on the different combinations possible here, as they are numerous, but I will flash up a couple here on screen for you to see. The addition of power combos, and most particularly tech bursts, fire explosions and cryo explosions, greatly magnifies the engineer's capabilities, and while the class continues to excel in the trademark supporting and debuffing roles, they now have a significantly improved ability to deal damage. The engineer who wishes to take full advantage of these combos should invest in the 3 moves Incinerate, Overload, and Cryoblast, as these will be your main primers and detonators. One of the most underrated aspects of an engineer's playstyle is the tech combo. With the Cryoblast recharge time and vulnerability set to max, and Incinerate geared towards frozen damage, every alternate power attack becomes a combo cryo explosion, freezing further enemies. A lightweight loadout and a low recharge time build would ensure that you're effectively attacking every 2 seconds, making the engineer a real powerhouse. While the engineer is more than capable of creating their own tech, fire, and cryo explosions, it's still a good idea to bring 2 squad mates with you that also give you plenty of useful options in terms of primers and detonators, and you have plenty to choose from, as Mass Effect 3 gives you 7 regular and 11 temporary squad mates as part of the story. Each has 4 active and 1 passive power, so there are plenty of options for engineers when choosing members for your squad. Engineers synergize well when combining powers to create tech bursts, flame explosions, and cryo explosions, and as such partner well with those who can use them. Edie and Caden both possess a variety of skills to do this, and as such make excellent choices. Because of the engineer's ability to destroy shields almost immediately, Singularity and Stasis, both possessed by Liara, also grant the engineer more crowd control and allows the engineer to forego radius upgrades for more damage to techs, making Liara an effective squad member to bring along. The rank 6 bubble upgrade for Stasis can be used to hold enemies in close proximity for area upgrade powers such as Cryo, Blast, or Incinerate too. So there you have it. There is everything that you need to know about the Engineer class before jumping into the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. Let me know what you think of the Engineer, and if you have any questions about the class, feel free to post those in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Hope you guys found this video useful and informative. If you did, remember to show your support by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I will be back again with my next video in the series, which will focus on the Infiltrator, so look forward to that. Hope you have a great week, guys and girls, and as always, happy gaming. I should go.